Hello and welcome back to Crew Parley, the flip-flopped version of the normal parlay we do on this channel. Normally you ask a question and I respond on the spot as best I can. This time I've posed the question and lots of people at the Crew Parley tier are responding. The question this month from me was, what is everyone's favorite TTRPG character they've played with and why? Is there a build in there? Maybe some dynamic storytelling? I want to know all about it. You could also talk about a character concept you just really want to play eventually, or that someone else in your playgroup played, because if we're being real, for most people, that's probably what they have more of. I'm going to be exploring what factors might make a TTRPG character fun to play, so any specifics you can give us would go a long way, I said before opening it up to people to respond. And I have to say, I feel like your responses, you really kept that point in mind. Like when I started writing the show notes for this one, I went in thinking, oh, you're going to want to focus on what they're trying to say is cool about the character. They're describing this thing, and what do they think is cool about the thing they've made? And that was extremely easy because you all seem to have thought that through as you were writing them down. As usual, we also have a hilariously perfect spread of examples. You'll see what I mean. Anyway, let's just settle in. There's not much to say. I'm just going to see what we can learn from each of these and hear about some cool TTRPG concepts, and maybe I'll find some of mine as examples. Let's get started. Just Rusty, you said, I think the most fun I've had playing a character was an NPC I played for one scene. Oh, as a game master. Cool. Yep. I didn't immediately think of that, but that's what I'll have more experience talking about too. They were an Inox, think a human-sized minotaur, okay, cool, enforcer for a local count whose job it was to hunt down artifacts in the area. The character was purely improvised. I needed to make some interesting people for my players to have the option to talk to at a tavern, classic, that they chose to spend the night at. I knew the Count had such agents, and Inox was one of the campaign settings races that hadn't been represented much yet. Yep, really common thing that I do too. You just need some filler NPCs, and so they might as well get, what work needs to get done. Cool. I can't even remember if he had a name. He might have just had a title like The Fixer. Because the character was big, I adopted a very broad stance in my chair, with 1 foot on the table. I'm slightly having trouble imagining that, but you later say that you're tall and a very tall gangly person, maybe like myself. I'm 6 foot tall, but I have way too long legs, and I'm like a spider monkey body type. So, okay, maybe you're just standing on the ground and you put your foot up on the table. I'm not going to do that on camera. And a very relaxed demeanor. They were a high-level character who was physically imposing. Nothing here was a threat to him. Had a very organic in-character flirtation with my friend's PC as this character, initiated by them, which isn't unheard of at my table, but is uncommon. Got feedback after the game from everyone at the table that the Inox cannot come back, he's too hot, and we can't deal with it. This character wasn't even supposed to be sexy, but everyone thought I'd put him there as a thirst trap. Unsure how to translate this information to real life. Hey, that's my job, that's fine. This is very much not my normal body language. I'm a very tall, gangly person and try not to take up too much more than my personal space, but much to consider. Yeah, I can definitely relate to, to this, right? I am physically reasonably large just because I'm tall, but my core is relatively small, even though I have big shoulder bones, and I'm overall pretty... Gangly is a bit harsh, but sure. Lean, very lean, especially my legs, and I have a proportionally small torso. Again, I look like a spider monkey or something figure, which is overpowered in physical activities where you need long reach. Anyway, my arms are, yeah. So this type of character is a character I personally often like to roleplay and relate to your experience with, where you just have to kind of fit your long limbs into a shape that will do for representing the character. And I have often had the experience that people then interpret the character different ways. So what can we learn here? Cool. Great character to start with. I think that the big thing here is what the character is to us versus the people at the table. It's quite fun when you have a character that is not intended to be a huge focus that becomes a favorite or infamous character to the party. Don't bring him back. We like him too much. Why does this keep happening? If you've been around the TTRPG community, you're thinking, this is a familiar story. The group at the table loves some super minor NPC that like a decent amount of time you personally think is kind of a silly character, or like what is the point of this character, or you thought this character isn't even that compatible with the party. Like you figure if this Inox really became friends with the party, he can basically just trivialize the entire encounter because he's a much higher level character. And so it's weird that the party constantly gets attached to these characters, right? But I think I more or less know why. It's because the character has room to be filled in by the rest of the party. They don't have their own thing they're about, really. They're often relatively idle, and the party at the table tends to take the tact that they can sort of fill in a little bit, or their interpretation becomes part of the character, and you have a real improv thing going without being like professional improvisers. Although, I mean, that's what you do in professional improv. You leave spaces open. That's not the only thing you do. Leave spaces open for other people's interpretations. A perspective I find very helpful when you think about other people in the world and yourself and other people's thoughts upon you is that we are basically the sum of perspectives about us. Now, I don't think that this means you in your personal life ought to suddenly care way more what other people think. I think that still doesn't make sense, even though it's true that we are the sum of perspectives about us. If people think what you're doing is bad, it is bad in a way, even if you think it's good. Sure, that doesn't necessarily mean you ought to stop doing it or you should change your opinion and think it's bad. Most of the perspectives about you in your life overall are from you. So fine, right? Like that's okay. Not so much that you have sovereignty over your personality, more that you just like win the democracy of your personality. You are most of the thoughts about you, so you definitely get a big say about who you are. But certainly your actions perceived and interpreted by others do affect, like that is reality as much as your thoughts about your actions. It's just that you probably have more of those in real life, like a lot more of those. But at the table, we can really lean into this. And if you think about good storytelling, good character writing, good character-focused stories, they often do this. They will often tend to be about a mix of the character's thoughts about themselves and other people's thoughts about themselves. I have a classic example that I can think of that's kind of a spoiler to tell you who, but let's just say from a popular series of fantasy, where this character is an infamous soldier in the past who's been put in a position where they can't really solve their problems with violence anymore, and they are into it. Good, that's fine. They're happy to take this new chapter of their life. They want to be a diplomat now. They're not that good at it, but they are earnest, good for them. Almost all of the rest of the world, this person is very famous, and was a conqueror of most of the places he's now doing diplomacy to. So almost everybody he meets has a very different interpretation. You're here to conquer us. You might be using soft power now, but that doesn't change a damn thing as far as they're concerned. And having it be that his character interactions with them are a mix of his earnestness, and this would be a severe uphill battle for someone in his position. It has been very entertaining, much more entertaining than if he just like turned over a new leaf or whatever and it was completely fine. I don't like it when there's that trope of a character he was kind of a bad guy when he was younger, turning over a new leaf, and then everyone is just like, oh great, like they're nice now. No, there's some baggage, and it's more interesting to unpack that baggage. That is the other, if you think of them as the party, they're not just going to believe you. You were a rogue in a party and you stole from the party. You can't just say, oh, now I'm good, so everyone should think I'm good now. Sometimes at a table that might feel necessary, but it is fun when it can be that you can include the, people around you's opinions. This creates a sense of cohesion and ownership and a real world when you're telling a story. But then if you take it to an interpretation for the table, yeah, I think you often get a case where the players feel invested in this character because they kind of made them. They kind of are the people who made the character. You, as you said, didn't do much to flesh out this character. A good amount of that was done by the table. And I think that when that happens, that's usually a recipe for the party really liking that character. I'm sure you could make some kind of like crime triangle where it's a party ownership over the character, like the party has input on the character is powerful and capable, and the character is cool or like fun. And if you have two of the three, or the more of the three you have, that's not like the crime triangle at all, then it's just the triangle. They will like it more if it's more of it's the triforce of people liking your characters. Sure. I think that's very effective. The idea that you let players fill out their relationship to an NPC is something I like to do a lot as well, though not always as intentionally this like very effective way. A lot of the time what I'll do is give the NPC a like not useful on its own hobby or skill, and it's meant as sort of bait that if the party could get into this a little bit, it could be helpful. I had this druid, and she was the groundskeeper and courier for a news organization, like a local newspaper, if you will, or town crier, between a few towns in the area. Organization, little outfit in one of my settings. And she, gets around a good amount, and it's a trade route. And so she had this habit of collecting magical items that suck, like that are just the worst. So a lot of these are is relatively high magic setting, and people are making magic items. We're in a magic item renaissance in my setting, or industrial revolution. And she really likes the prototypes, but they suck a lot. So for example, it might be like a smoke bomb, but it only creates a 10-foot wide pillar of smoke that goes up 50 feet, but not very effective as a way to like smoke bomb and then clear a room. Now my party members got quite clever, and one of them is a flight capable, let's say, class, and they used it to fly. And it turns out they do have a lot of room to dodge attacks as long as they just move up and down in the smoke. And because it is a magic item, their wings don't disturb even a 10-foot pillar of smoke enough that it makes it unuseful. I didn't really think of that, but it makes sense. Cool. I don't know. They found lots of other interesting stuff in there. And as is the case with people who are hoarders, the character's impression of what is useful isn't necessarily what actually is useful. And so I allowed there to be some random stuff in there, and my players picked up on that. Like, that, who's to say all of this isn't useful? It might just not be useful to a druid who is a courier. And so, yeah, they rolled some items that were actually fairly useful. Like, there were sending stones in there, for example. Not that useful to her. Her whole thing is she's just running around all the time and has a network of forest creatures to communicate stuff ahead to her partner that lives in the treehouse space that they have in the woods, doing this little news outlet. But to other people, I mean, sending stones are a legit magical item. I don't know. The party, these were like level 2 player characters. That's good, right? So it's fun to have it be that there's something up for interpretation by the party about these characters. I have a thing with my players where I'm always quite firm that you can have any character could potentially be your ally or even join your party for a little while. And I don't distinguish. I'm not setting up NPCs to be that way or not. No, and conversely, nobody will help you unless you do something to earn their assistance. I won't bombard you with characters, all of whom hate you, but nobody is just going to like flop into your party. I'm not going to give you any official companions. I'm just going to give you endless unofficial companions. And I guess that attitude is a kind of incomplete version of this advice where, yeah, okay, leave some big space, like literally just don't do like half of the character's backstory or traits and stuff, and just let the party do that. When you introduce the character and you give them like one or two these key features, I really liked yours. They're a high level character who is physically imposing, nothing here's a threat to them, so they're very relaxed, and they're, a bulky human-sized minotaur character. Let the party figure it out. When you introduce those traits, okay, now have a little conversation and pay extremely close attention to what the party thinks of these characters. You could even do a little trick like have the NPC be a bit offended or surprised by something your party members say to egg the player on to flesh out a little bit. Like, you thought I was attractive, I thought I was threatening, and then maybe the player character just gives you it a bit. And then that just is the character now. You can perhaps not completely straight-faced, but embrace it, and the players feel like the players do kind of own the character now. That sounds great to me. Cool. Unexpected game master advice. I bet most people were thinking of player characters, which the rest of the examples in this video are, but anyway, that's very cool. Really, really good example. Pistol Whip, what you got? Two characters come to mind for me. First is Pepper Shepherd, a stray dog who became a magical girl. She's a German Shepherd, of course, and she used to be one of numerous stray dogs living in an urban park. A particular human came to visit her often, bringing her food and generally looking after her. In time, Pepper came to love the human. The magical tree at the heart of the city acknowledged Pepper's love by uplifting her into a magical girl who could fight threats to the city and thereby protect her beloved human. As a character, she's very much a dog in human shape, in that her thoughts and mannerisms adhere to her dog sensibilities rather than human common sense. In particular, her gluttony often got her into trouble. She ended up eating a number of important NPCs, some of whom came back into an amalgamated magical girl form that understandably bore a grudge against her. The Madoka Magica references aside, she ended up eating a number of important NPCs is the hardest line in this parlay. What do you mean? And we'll never know. Such is my investment in Pepper that I wrote a very short story about an encounter she had off-screen, completely off the cuff. As a role-playing and writing exercise, I challenged myself to use only short and simple sentences as a reflection of her sensibilities. I had various ideas for her mechanics and flip-flop between several approaches over the course of the campaign. In general, I made her a simple bruiser-type character, as befit her animalistic tendencies. Yeah, I'm thinking something along the lines of like a barbarian, from what you're making it sound like, a stereotypical barbarian. To quote a fellow player, I can imagine that someone like Pepper would be truly terrifying if she had an above-average IQ. Make of that what you will. I will also say that Pepper's final achievements in that campaign included eating, again, what do you mean, the final boss, and entered a polygamous relationship with her human and one other dog girl with the blessing of the magical tree. It made sense in context, or not. Viva la Yuri. Viva la Yuri indeed. So obviously part of the learning from this example is backstory, and you can see how this is an effective backstory for actually playing because it's not that long to explain. It's like straightforward to explain. It is, and I think this is very effective when you play D&D at a table, a little tropey, but not in a way that doesn't leave. It's a very open-ended trope. It's a good use of a trope here. You know, find the power of true love and become a magical girl, and so it happened. But you've got someone to protect. You have an origin source of your power or abilities in some way. I think that can be very useful. I can imagine as a game master for this campaign, depending on what kind of playgroup you have, you've given me a lot of hooks to care about your character's backstory and have a lot of freedom still in exactly what happens with like the magical tree and what is threatening the city and etc. So a very useful backstory in that it is, if not concise, it is able to be made concise so people can know it without it taking forever. There's plenty of room for the game master to buoy their freedom rather than feeling restricted. You know, it kind of helps create world building if that is a thing that your playgroup is focused on. And human relationships as well. Like there's a prompt for how the character would act or what you can expect from this character. The character's motivations, the character's flaws are baked in a little bit, which I think is cool, awesome. Very good example. The short fiction thing, very nice. I really like that idea. I think it's cool for helping you get in the character's space. And I think a lot of people listening would be surprised how often the, you know, YouTuber or on stage D&D playgroups have a tendency to do this kind of thing as well. It's very common in something like something between acting and improv. I would imagine that for a group like, yeah, you know, Critical Role, a more role-playing heavy table, I bet they do this quite religiously, I would imagine, or at least some of them do. It's a very common and effective way to get into a character. And I love the idea that you didn't go crazy, but it's fun to just like try to write it like, well, they were a dog, like they think like a dog. What would that be like if you wrote it? That's really cool. It reminds me of XKCD's book about explaining rocket physics, but only with like the 1000 or something most common words in the English language, most commonly used words. So it's called like the upgoer instead of like a rocket, because rocket isn't one of the 1000 most common words. Anyway, interesting project. And it reminds me of, you could build a character around that. Yeah, totally cool. Of course, having the character's mechanics be inspired by their character. We're going to get to an example later that is the opposite of this, but I think that's a very useful way to think about playing these games. There are kinds of players who want a character first. They want to bring a character to the table. And to an extent, the mechanics are going to come at the table. They probably will think about them before they get there. But the mechanic half is kind of what they're getting from the shared game. The character they are bringing to the table. Versus, it is also very common, I would guess that it is more common, for players to bring a mechanical character to the table and get the character for the character from the table interactions. Of course, you can do both, and I bet a lot of people think of themselves as doing both, but do lean harder into one or the other. So it's really interesting that we quite cleanly got an example of each one, so that was cool. You've got another example, and there's a few more things I wanted to say, so I'm going to save them and spread them out with this, because as you might expect, Pistol Whip's two characters are not completely unrelated in their sensibilities, but this is a fairly different example. So yeah, let's take a look. The second character is a more recent creation that has since undergone multiple revisions. Fortitude van Eislar. I really like the last name Eislar. Van, V-A-N. Stands to dethrone Pepper as my favorite TTRPG character once she gets more scenes and narrative development. As is my wont, I started with a mechanical goal for the character. So see, I'm not at all trying to contradict that idea, just to say that it may be that to other people, when they say a mechanical goal for their character, it's way more, I don't know, like number crunchy or gamey. I know what you mean here, though. So to finish the paragraph, thought of a narrative that would naturally lead to her developing in that direction, the mechanical goal, and figuring out how to make the crunch and fluff meet in the middle. In Fortitude's case, I knew that I wanted her to have super strength. So that's the mechanical goal. Indeed, this seems different than if you imagine Pepper being originated by that backstory that we read a chunk of, a summary of. Then that feels like a more character-focused design. This, indeed, I see what you mean. If it's a mechanical-focused design in that you thought, I want them to have super strength, it could feel like it's coming more from the mechanics, but I think the sensibility to want to marry the crunch and the fluff from the outset is still more in the middle, more balanced than what a lot of people end up doing. That's not to say that's better or worse, just that I think it's interesting to keep track of this when we make characters. It's just interesting, but also it can be helpful. What part of the character, you don't have to want to bring the mechanical half for the character half, but if you do, then that's cool too. So it sounds like here you started with a sort of initial thread, you want super strength, and then thought about what type of character would lead to that, but then took a meaningful step of trying to marry those two things. Cool. Sorry to interrupt so much. That led me down several rabbit holes of research, and I ended up making a character whose multiple facets pull her in many different directions, and yet all come together to form a coherent story. To summarize, her father is the Sorcerer King of Eislar. That's glorious. Who summoned and contracted with her mother, a demon whose dance-based magic can shatter stone. So we'll put a pin in it. Her heritage was hidden from her. She was raised as a mortal architect, far from the kingdom's capital, in order to avoid the prejudice and pitfalls of noble society. She became a, great terms by the way, solar exalt, and the rush of power quickened her demon blood at the same time, like woke up that part of her heritage. In particular, she exalted as a nightcast, one of the spies and assassins of the unconquered sun, and she fled to a distant land to turn over a new leaf and avoid persecution. But the plot of the first narrative arc coincidentally had her pass through her home kingdom along the way to that destination. So she's a half-demon, assassin, architect, dancer, sorcerer, and future queen, though it doesn't sound like she knows that yet, all at the same time. It really taxes her character creation and advancement resources, but I think the concept came together really well. Put a pin in it. My favorite scene with Fortitude so far is her audience with her father, the Sorcerer King. She'd seen him only once before during a parade when she was a child. What she didn't realize was that he had specifically arranged with her guardian, secretly his closest advisor, yep, that trope, to bring her to that parade so he could see her. He had someone watching over her. His intense stare brought back that childhood memory, and that's when the king announced himself as her father. She did not take this well, as she was A, upset that her uncle, quote-unquote, had kept this from her all these years, and B, completely unprepared to be told she would be queen one day. I have so much fun with that scene that I started to regret not having recorded it. With the other players' permission, I've started to record subsequent sessions and post edited versions for our private enjoyment. In so doing, I also took over the responsibility of writing the session recaps for the Game Master as a show of appreciation. I'm really looking forward to playing Fortitude more, as she has many stories left to tell. I've actually started writing several anecdotes from her life, including that childhood parade where she saw her father, just to flex my creative muscles. She'll definitely be my favorite as she matures. Lots of stuff in here. So first, to continue on the thread from before, right? The idea that there's backstory stuff in here that the Game Master can hang a hook on. You know, if you, like me, and it kind of sounds like Pistol Whip, play with people you've known for quite a long time, then it can be pretty easy to know what kind of thread the people you're playing with want to set up. I have to say, I think a lot of people, not at all specifically Pistol Whip, I don't know, have a play group they've played with for a long time, but there are still assumptions you could unpack that will make for more fun. For example, for a long time, I had this player and a very close friend of mine, and he knows me very well, but he had retained this assumption that I didn't know about until our recent campaign. Or he had assumed that I am presenting them narrative threads and they're meant to just play along and pick them up. I literally never do this, and I've told them that I never do this. And that it's fun to me. The fun for me is that I get to see what direction you go in. Now, understand, I present players with plot hooks and like things they could do, but you are as meant to ignore them as you are to take them. And it is not doing me specifically, me Zandy, not Game Masters in general. It is doing them a disservice, but me Zandy specifically, I want you to reject some of them. And I am very comfortable just making up an entire new thing on the spot based on the insane thing you decide to do instead of my perfectly reasonable idea. That's fun for me. It's not for a lot of people. I think that's kind of unfair to a lot of game masters, but that's what I've had told my players. But he had retained this assumption from previous playgroups that it's like wrong not to take up the obvious plot threads. And that became obvious during our campaign, and we were able to unpack that and have a lot more fun. He started doing the stuff that fit his character more and seemed like he was having a lot more fun. And he often plays bards. You know, he's this kind of player where he wants to fraternize. He's going to pick an NPC waifu from the characters that I create. And that's great. That's fine. That's expected at this point. I'm into that. Our playgroup is fine with that. And I just want him to be able to explore this chaotic world. The reason it came to a head is because they started out being criminals or framed as criminals. And so it quickly became awkward if he was just going to play along and be nice with everybody that they met. Like you're on a wanted poster. Like it didn't work. And very quickly it became a lot more fun. And he had all of these, he had been kind of sneaking behind a caravan to basically take advantage of their protection along a trade route. And so he would know a lot of people at the settings we were going to, but he didn't take that stuff because he thought it was stepping on my toes. On the contrary, he had set up a ton of plot hooks or like world building hooks for me. He just didn't want to use them at first. And then once he had a very good conversation, we're off to the races. This type of character backstory then of Pistol Whips, it gives you a lot of places to like hang a narrative thread on, or like Fortitude has a ton of these plot threads ready to go. And you can also imagine again, not to project too much Pistol Whip, I don't know your game, there's plenty that don't have to come up either. So there's lots of stuff that can fit the campaign, and there's other stuff that can be background and build the character up without necessarily needing to be like a whole side quest. At the best of times, I think this type of character can make it really easy to run a targeted campaign where the player will have lots of stuff to say, and no game master wants anything more than a player that is interested in playing and has lots of stuff to say about the game. So I personally think that's fantastic, provided that your playgroup likes that and that other players also have stuff like this, you know, that it doesn't monopolize everybody else's playtime, but it doesn't sound like it does. Again, this is not really meant to be like troubleshooting your problems in D&D or your whatever tabletop system. We're just talking about the good things about doing things this way. And make no mistake, I think that this is one where a lot of players will go, people listening to this video will go, dear Lord, that's a lot of backstory. That puts a lot of weight on the game master. Yeah, I could see that being the case, but I think it's helpful to think about what the benefits could be too. And also to not interpret players in your playgroup as immediately being selfish or self-centered just because they do this. Like, it can be very beneficial or helpful. It's all about the context. It doesn't matter at all what this is on its own. It only matters the type of person Pistol Whip is and the type of playgroup their playgroup is, whether this is good or bad as a type of backstory or character setup. I can easily see it being good. I don't know. So, yeah, I think that's cool and can be helpful. I don't think it's bad to have there be like a ton of stuff in the character's backstory. You know, my partner has a character in that campaign I was talking about that is just they were a war veteran. You know, they had been in a lot of conflict previously, and they are now settled down. They lost a leg, and they've settled down in a little hut on the edge of this cute little trading village. I'm sure nothing bad will happen to that. Burned to the ground in the first session, of course. And they bought a prosthetic leg. And because this is the advent of magical industrialization, that's that same setting, yeah, you can imagine you can do a lot of fun things with a prosthetic leg. But also, like, what is their training? You know, do they have martial arts training? That could be very different. Maybe they monk multi-class. Are they a martial fighter? Is there a way they can store, like a weapon-based combatant? Is there a way they can store the weapon in the leg or something like that? There's a lot of these hooks where if my partner decides on what they want those parts of the backstory to be, that makes it much easier for me to create campaign around that feels targeted and thematic and gives them magical rewards that they can use. You can imagine a whole little system where they have a modular leg that they can build out into. And for my type of game mastering, that's not putting a lot of work on me. I like that. That's what's fun to me. I want you to say, I want to turn my leg into a multi-tool. Like, hell yeah, great. That's why I'm here. For me, this is the let me play too part of it. So just to say, I like this type of, like, I think I would enjoy being a player in the type of game I'm imagining you playing Pistol Whip with this type of player character. Not always, sure, but I like the sort of role-playing heavy, you have a backstory and you mean business about it, but you're also leaving room in the narrative for other stuff. Great, you know, I like that. Again, I would imagine a lot of people's more negative reactions are that this character seems to have too much protagonist energy or something. But again, it all depends on the table. Like, what if the party is full of those people? A whole party full of estranged, important people, you know, like that don't know that they're potentially the future heir to a kingdom, or like maybe a big business venture or an ancient magical power, and the whole party is those types of characters. Sounds cool. Like, that sounds fun. I don't know. The usual problem is that not everybody will do this at a table, and then it will become unbalanced. But it could just not be unbalanced too. So I think that's neat. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the like metagroup stuff, because that's also really cool. Just as a quick aside, I love the dance-based magic idea. A huge thing that I've already incorporated into my D&D is bards use dance as a somatic component, like trigger spells, you know, wave your hand or whatever, using dance. And game masters, you need to be a little generous here. This may mean that the bard has more open-ended somatic restrictions than other characters. That is, if their hands are tied, they can do a somatic component with their feet. And that is a slight mechanical advantage, but it's very cool and flavorful, and I think it's completely fine to say bards as a school of magic just have more open-ended somatic components, or maybe even verbal components. Maybe they can hum or like play drums with their hands on their legs, and that counts as a verbal component because they're making sound and their magic comes from art. So are they allowed to do it in this more open-ended way? I'm not sure that's exactly what you were doing there, just to say that I love the idea of like unusual trigger for your magic can lead to a lot of really, really fun role-playing for very little real estate. So I love that idea. The dance-based magic thing is sick. Also really interesting to have, this is just a compliment about the world building thing, that the king like is married to but is also the contractor of the queen, who is a demon. That's interesting. Like there's something there about the rulers are like, we're not originally equals. In general, a sort of more advanced topic in relationship theory, in my opinion, that's very interesting but just not really appropriate for most people yet, is relationships aren't equal. They're not. That isn't like a thing that is actually true. And so unpacking that is better than trying to just force people to be equals. They're not. It's extremely difficult to impossible to be equals in a relationship. So it's better to acknowledge that there is a desire for that in humanity. Humans care about equality in this kind of primal way, but also that isn't really, like, exact equality is not really the target. And you can have a very good relationship where you are apples to oranges equal, an equal amount of apples and oranges, but still apples and oranges. I don't want to just eat apples, so that's fine. Also, nice apple figure. Anyway, and then I wanted to conclude by talking a bit about the like group thing. The idea that you can look back through what your group had done or record audio or something. Some people might be disconcerted by video. If this sounds vaguely interesting to you, but you just get skeeved out about it and you're listening to this, yeah, try just audio and see if your group, obviously ask permission. See if your group would be okay with that. It can be very interesting. As somebody who has their work recorded pretty much all the time, I don't currently, but have in the past quite a lot over the years, listened to my own self speaking through the things that I say in Parley and streams, and it's very helpful. You learn things about the way that you talk. A decent way to like get good at talking through things like this is just to do it and listen to yourself doing it. And if you are the kind of person where you're hyper aware of these things, it can become surprisingly easy to improve at that, is my experience. I can also easily imagine, though I haven't specifically done this myself, that if you recorded your own tabletop role-playing game play, you could very much more easily become a better player, a more interesting player, by hearing the dynamic at the table from a third-party perspective. If that sounds like, oh, I know what I would hear, ask your play group if you can try it. Like, I think that could be very valuable and a lot of fun and not that hard. Like, the problems might be kind of easy to work through, or you'll be able to improve in a way. There's currently in the discourse, there is this interesting thing happening where Matt Mercer, the very famous game master, is a player in campaign 4 for Critical Role. I don't really follow Critical Role, but I know of this happening. And so some of you might be familiar with the Matt Mercer effect, where, he's this famous and overly idolized, that's always bad, game master. And this is bad because it means that people compare this professional, shiny looking thing to their table, when no, they would have more fun if they did their own thing. And it is really never productive to compare to this other example. Now, learning from Matt Mercer's specialties, such as they are, sure, that could be useful, but this is not what people are doing. They're just saying it's not like this. This is the target. You aren't doing this, so you're doing bad. That's obviously not helpful. You're not going to be able to make, and you wouldn't want to make, the same kind of game that Matt Mercer is making. If you think that you do want the same kind of game, that's an indication that your tastes are still growing, and you will not want that once they've fully grown. Anyway, he's a player in a game now, not the game master. And so you can probably see what's going to happen. Obviously, he's going to be the kind of player who's like really, really good at setting up other people during play. And so there's a sort of reverse Mercer effect where it's like, I want players like that, which the problem is that's a little bit more of a valid desire in that the things he's doing as a player are more objectively good, would apply to a lot of games. Most tables would probably benefit from a player like this. Devil may care attitude plus you set up other players' scenes and drama and interaction. You help keep other people engaged. You engage in a way where you just do stuff. You drive the plot and you drive player interactions. That's really all a game needs to do well. I can tell you as the good news, I guess, about that new Matt Mercer effect is that's not nearly as hard to do as the thing he is doing as a game master. This is not pejorative, just to say I think you can see if he has way more experience as a game master and then he's so good at this, I swear if you listen to yourself in a D&D session, you will be able to do this effectively quickly. It will not take decades to become skilled at that. So it's very good. I'm not no shade at all. I think he's doing a fantastic job with that from the examples I've seen. Just to say that I don't think that's that inaccessible. And I think it's fantastic to get to see little bits of your own gameplay from a third party perspective. Pistol Whip, you're also obviously somebody who wants to pursue the art and creative expression of the thing for its own sake to an extent. So I'm not that surprised to hear you quickly realize that it would be just interesting and fun, but also probably helpful and lead to more enjoyable role playing to flesh out stories and hear the gameplay from a third perspective. Seems very in line with the kind of person who wants to make these kinds of characters. I just thought that was very cool. I think it's neat that you're doing that. Finally, eye patch notes. With Siofi Hamura, a corruption of Sophie and Homura, is the fabled witch of contradiction from Pathfinder Parley lore. You've done a big series of Parley about the mechanics of this character. Guess which starting point this character is going to come from? Well, I don't know that for sure, but boiling her still in progress narrative to a few bullet points, she is built atop two sand castles. So in Pathfinder, number 1, Dual Strike, is from the Duoboon school of thought to unite the 2-weapon fighting and Vital Strike feat lines, or the attack as many times as possible and the attack once for great damage feat lines, respectively. The problem is that attack as many times as possible is collapsed to just twice under Dual Strike, and the great damage is stuck around just twice too. It goes without saying that the cost, 5 feats for Dual Strike, exceeds the benefit of getting on-hit procs twice instead of once, right? That's just the way too many system resources, way too high of an opportunity cost for it to be worth simply triggering 2 attacks worth of damage. Not bad, but 5 feats? Good lord. Number 2, Hinder is a blood hex for witches, right? That prevents the target from making multi-attacks. Blood hexes can only target enemies previously damaged by the user, making blood hexes take a stiff 2 turns to execute, if not employing shenanigans. But we are employing 5 feet shenanigans, with shenanigans like Hinder being one of the better blood hexes, but the payoff is still questionable. Either of these elements could have a full character built around them, but the story continues. The Eldritch Guardian, a fighter subclass, allows family familiars to copy their master's feats. Aha! A mounted combat package is included to ensure that Siofi is able to flank at all times, because their mount counts as flanking, I guess. Pathfinder and similar tabletop games lack a formal aggro system. The game master ideally pilots the enemy game pieces in a way that fits the world's logic. But here's the rub from an enemy's standpoint. Run away from Siofi? Can't, not without provoking an opportunity attack from her mount and herself. Also, her mount flies, so good luck getting far. It's a bat, right? Attack Siofi? I hope I'm saying that right. If she bites you and landed her hex, you can take at most 1 attack against her. Or 1 attack against her mount, but not both. So, not very effective. Ignore Siofi, putting aside the fact that she's mechanically incentivized to cackle at you specifically to trigger the Hinder thing. Actually, she hits kind of hard on her turn. 6d6 from her and 8d6 from her bat. Ignore her at your peril. Eye patch notes take great pride in Siofi, since she unites several surface-level bad abilities into one core concept. That being the MMO-style tank in a system that does not have MMO-style aggro, due to the, you can't just ignore her and you can't really run away, right? seems like one of the best things to do is take a defensive action, maybe like take the dodge action. I don't know how it works in Pathfinder. She gives multiple mechanical reasons to be targeted in a more sportsman-like manner than the wizard casting a stun spell and moving on. Hinder is not a decisive debuff and has many systemic outs, but it is exactly that restraint that makes CFE so much more appealing to field. Cool. So on the surface, people are probably thinking, yeah, okay, we got the unexpected game master example, we got some role-playing and character-heavy examples, and then now we're getting a mechanical example. But I want you to first note that one of the things that it seems like you're saying you find fun about this, I patch notes, is that it's a pretty interactive type of build. It's strong, but there aren't like no solutions to it. Even just having bullet points where you say, yeah, run away, attack, and ignore this character doesn't really work. Sure, but in enumerating those, you're saying, to me anyway, you think it is interesting for the game master to get to grapple with those. And a game master who wants that type of gameplay, hello, yeah, that sounds fun. You know, what is the sort of solution to this little combat puzzle? A kind of sub-theme of this parlay has been, how do you do character stuff in a way that has synergy with being a game master, or you're a game master? And this is a really good example. I think a lot of people who don't like being game masters, I hate to be critical, but I do think it is partly the players. And if you make characters like this and communicate with your game master, it's fun. Part of the game for me is you have a combat puzzle for me to solve, not just my encounter is a combat puzzle for you to solve. Your character is a carefully wrought machine of game system synergy, and I get to kind of tackle that when I create encounters and try to find something that will be challenging for you. It's delightful when you think something will be hard for a player, and at first they put up more resistance than you thought. You realize, no, they had a more robust plan than I thought they did for this setup. I played this warlock character that was all about having like the most cantrips, basically. And so they were a sorcerer, warlock, multi-class, but not the coffee lock thing. Sorcerer gets the most starting cantrips, so you can just take one level. And then warlock gets a thing where you can just take a bunch of cantrips from other classes. Well, spells from other classes, but cantrips. So if you take that one sorcerer level, 4 warlock levels, you get to your feet at level 4, and you can use that to take cantrips from somewhere else. I had like basically every relevant cantrip in the entire game. Never mind that this is kind of bad on a warlock because you already have one of the most versatile cantrips of all time, Eldritch Blast. Suffice it to say, I took the utility cantrips, okay? That's what I'm trying to say. You know, you can get like Shillelagh or whatever, but mostly utility cantrips. You know, you got your Prestidigitation, you got your Druid Craft, you got your Create Water or Shape Water, the cantrip version, etc. You know, Prestidigitation, all these. And it was pretty fun to see how I was trying to get a lot out of cantrips, even more out of cantrips, to like make the most of Warlock's limited spell slots. And so my game master, knowing I like to be pushed with these character builds because I put a lot of work into it, said, I feel like you just die to me being aggressive to you, right? And well, no, every single spell I picked is just there to get me out of dodge when the going gets tough. So I got attacked, punched a hole in the roof. Does Misty Step let you move to anywhere with line of sight? Like, I don't have to fit through the line of sight, right? If I can see out the window, I can Misty Step there. He read it a little bit and went, I don't really see an interpretation where that doesn't work. Sure. Boop, out of there. And in fact, being able to use Shape Water and things like Prestidigitation and such, you can make it very difficult to escape a building if you're outside and the enemy is inside. There's a lot of shenanigans, like 5-foot ice blocks and making the windows or all the sources of light not work properly and making the building shake to be disorienting. It can be a bad time for a, you know, cool DM who is willing to give you some player fiat. If you are trapped inside a house and I have like all 7 of the best utility cantrips, and also still Eldritch Blast, and also still Misty Step, and also Stop Hitting Yourself. And that was a lot of fun. I mean, it was cool that they tried to counter me, but I had that is a good solution to my character, right? I can't Misty Step that many times, but it still forces me to do my character's thing, and they can say, you know, okay, eventually the NPC gets annoyed and tries to just slam through the wall, and then I have time to think, okay, do I hear them running? Can I try to like put a block of ice in their way to reinforce the thing they're trying to break down, or like freeze the edges of the door so it's harder to open? Sure. And then maybe the strength check is harder for them, stuff like that. And I didn't really intend that to like some kind of Rainbow Six Siege thing for this character, but it was a lot of fun. I don't know, like that worked out. So I like the idea of a mechanical puzzle from the player that gets the game master engaged. Like, what can I do to kind of mess with this? As long as your game master is also on a two-way street with you, they don't want to trivialize your character, but now they have a game too. They can try to kind of counter and play with the thing you made. Very cool. Love that. Also, I maybe it's just because I've done these parlay. Probably a lot of people listening to your explanation thought this character was pretty mechanically complicated. But having gone through the parlay where you described this character in more detail, I know that it's actually a pretty elegant character build. And so it's not like it's ridiculously difficult to keep straight what this character does. It's not actually that complicated mechanically. How you get there and make the build not like completely suck is pretty complicated. Like, that will have been hard to make and come up with and notice. But the actual mechanisms the character is using are not ludicrously complicated. It's not some super long combo that takes forever to explain. Look, that's fine as long as your table is down for it. I'm just saying you can see how that could make gameplay flow really well. You basically just debuff enemies and you're a melee bruiser, right? Like, it's not that complicated. But that's good, actually, because it means people can play around those mechanics while you still have a pretty robust response to different situations. It's an elegant, to summarize that term that way, for this parlay type of build. I think that matters a lot as well. I completely understand why this has a distinct feel to you. This is almost enough to make me want to just play Pathfinder. So great. I mean, no offense, Pathfinder. I'm just saying this. It sounds very cool. I want to have builds like this in my games. And we kind of do, but Pathfinder has some nice systems. Yeah. And you can totally make a character that's mechanics forward. Again, I was saying in Pistol Whip's responses that I think a lot of players come to the table with mechanics they want to play, because that's pretty much what's on D&D's very influential character sheets, the mechanics of your character. Yeah, there's a little bit of a section for you creating some role-playing prompts and stuff, but people often literally just skip that. Many people that I've heard teach other people D&D literally point to that part of the character sheet and say, you can just skip this. And it's like, you can, you know, maybe down the line, I'm a little concerned, but for a player that's interested in role-playing, this can be a surprisingly common and effective approach. Make no mistake, iPatch Notes may enjoy making a character that has a quite robust personality and backstory and plot threads and stuff. Just because they have chosen to include this in the parlay prompt doesn't mean that they don't care about that stuff. I mean, I don't know, iPatch Notes, you tell me. Just to say, I think it would be wrong to view this and say, oh, this is just someone who wants the number crunch. Like, not necessarily. It all matters the context. And the idea that a lot of players don't at all prioritize that more. It's just that that is what they are kind of being asked to bring, or that's what they feel like they're being asked to bring. And then to them, the point of the game is that you kind of find out the character as you go. That can make sense. There's also a lot of people who say, well, I'm going to make the character be what the mechanics would kind of force them to be. So, for example, it kind of seems like you're going to be an animal inclined, an animal tamer of a sort, right? The kind of person who needs to literally cackle during combat, but then is still a melee combatant, especially with the way you trigger the hexes and hinder and cackle and stuff. You know, that creates a certain picture of a kind of person, a battle junkie, perhaps, or at least someone who's not bothered by being in combat and maybe is a little bit into it. After all, you don't need to feed the bat as much, although they're familiar, right? So maybe you don't need to feed them at all. Anyway, you get the point. So yeah, I think it's really interesting to take a character that is prompted by mechanics, and not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily mean that's all it's going to be, though it could be. That's fine too. A good amount of people play D&D as like a very tactical combat, and that's mostly it kind of game. There's a whole group of people who try to really heavily optimize the exact damage per round and utility of builds, and I think those people are damaging the fun of the game in the sense that a lot of abilities are just bad if the game isn't very role-playing heavy. And it would make more sense to just play something that is more designed for that. But that doesn't mean that mode of play isn't fun. I just feel like if you were to take back some of the open-endedness, that could also add a lot to it. Now, something you've mentioned a lot in your parlay, iPatch Notes, your personal parlay, about this build, is that you like it to be that the character is like the least assumptions possible, basically. Not at all that you're saying, I like this because it is the most objectively effective. Just that you want it to be something that is transferable and doesn't, I hope this isn't projecting, not just that doesn't contradict with other people's tables, but which doesn't get its power from relying on assuming the game master will be creatively minded toward your interpretations of abilities. You want to get the power from a non-generous interpretation of the abilities, which I think can be pretty cool. Now, thinking back to my character example, my cantrips guy. No, I only made that character because I know my game master is willing to let me get up to some shenanigans with cantrips, but also knows I won't push my luck. Like, I'm not going to say, you can seal a barrier, with Arcane Lock, a level 2 spell, using shape water. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, no, you can't. Like, if you poured water around the edges of a door frame and froze it in real life, that would make it surprisingly meaningfully harder to open, I think, but not at all the same as magically locking it. Like, that just makes the strength check harder, for goodness sakes. And they know that I don't want you to let me use Arcane Lock with shape water. I want it to give me a modest benefit and see how far I can get and have it be what I consider fair. But still, right, that's not a very transferable build. And I have a lot of respect for that approach in a way. The idea that you're mainly focused on enjoying what can be had with no generosity from your game master. And it can be transferable, sure, but also it's something that doesn't really rely on that to be good. It's, again, a very opportunity cost restricted, a very non-generous interpretation of the system's way to make a character. Can be very fun. I think that can be a great character prompt in general. What if you don't get to abuse these abilities? Will they then be fun? I think one of the things that happens if you make a build like that, and what you can see here, is that you created a pretty powerful tool, but it's not specific at all. It would be good in most situations one would encounter. You don't have to have an ambush or whatever. The antithesis of this would be like an assassin style character. Yeah, when you can assassinate someone, or sneak up on them, I guess, right? It's going to be really good. The damage will be crazy. It is crazy if you make a build like that in, let's say, 5th edition D&D. But it's kind of terrible elsewhere, and there can be a lot of fun derived from having the challenge be, okay, what if my game master just throws all sorts of stuff at me that this build hates? Is my build good at those things? Not because it's good for your game master to purposefully try to kill you and hard counter your build every single time and not let you have your fun, but because it means your build can always do its cool thing. You could just always, in basically every situation, like, do the thing. I think that's neat. Anyway, there's very cool. Great spread of examples. You see what I was saying at the beginning of the parlay? The spread of examples has been so good. These 4 things are like the 4 examples. If I could have cherry picked 4 examples for, the good version of different styles of character creation. It's not like this is everything, sure, but I just thought that was really cool. Good job. Very good job. With the examples this time. I know I always praise that, but it's always impressive. So I'm gonna keep saying I think it's good. And you know what? Even if they were just lopsided and janky responses, that's interesting in its own way. That's not bad. Don't let that intimidate you out of submitting, because a lot of people have this Crew Parley perk. I offered this at the $5 tier, which is my equivalent to just being a Twitch subscriber. If you have, a free Twitch sub, or you just were gifted one or something, which is a lot of people, you get this. I have my system set up where Discord and Patreon sync, and Twitch and Patreon and Discord can plug in. And so if you have those set up, you just get access to this channel and you can submit something. We'd love to have you. Submit a whole dang thing. The prompt for October is this. So if you want to submit something, you still have time to join in if you like. For me, many activities, chess, many trading card games, rock, paper, scissors, as well as a variety of other video games, sports, and board games, exhibit that game theory thing where you try to out-mind game your opponent and think one step ahead of them to win. Mostly PvP games. So what's the point of one over another? Pokemon Showdown versus poker, for instance. Is there an instance of this type of gameplay you particularly favor? Why that one? Do you hate this instead and avoid it like the plague? Why? That's it. Yeah, there's a lot of these games that are basically just wizard poker, or literal poker, So what is the point of them? Usually they're turn-based, though you can definitely apply this to some action games too. You've got chess or poker or Pokemon Showdown or Magic the Gathering or rock, paper, scissors kind of is the same thing, where you basically just need to read your opponents somehow. How you read them could differ. That's one of the things that might be like why someone would prefer this or that game, right? But why prefer one over the other? Or, you know, in Pokemon Showdown, there's room for builds, kind of unlike in poker. And so you could have the sort of rogue build way of playing. You make a setup that is harder for your opponent to read because it's less common, but probably at the exchange of it being as good. Anyway, you can submit using the description or sign up for your own parlay. We'd love to have you. See you in the next one.